Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is Ben, and I'm joined by Sawyer and Giacomo today. We didn't do the normal, I'm Ben, and then, see who's going to jump in. I don't want Sawyer and Giacomo fighting over the mic here, so I'm just going to introduce them myself. So it's a little bit of a special one today because we have three coaches on the podcast, and this is something that I want to start doing a little bit more frequently if we can coordinate it, is just get a mixture because, given the fact that we have five coaches on the team at this time, we can only run through the combinations of pairs so many times. And so I think it's nice to get three or four, and we're going to try to get some coaching roundtables with all five of us. Of course, there's a balance where when there's too many people on the podcast, then it's hard to, feel like everyone's getting a voice, and there can be kind of issues of people talking over each other, but I think that we're going to be able to make it work just fine. And today we're going to be talking about common beginner mistakes. This is something like a lot of podcast ideas that just came to me the other day while I was training, kind of in between sets. Like, I'll just get ideas that just pop up into my head, and so this was one of them. But before we get into the topic for today and go over some of these myths so that you can avoid them, whether you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced. I think these things can all apply to us at any point in our journey. So, with that said, Sawyer, Giacomo, now I'll let you guys fight over the mic. I want updates from both of you, but I'll let you guys decide who's giving the update first.
Go ahead, Giacomo.
I won. I knew it. I knew I won. I won every single face off as a kid. They're like, staring contest. You lose. It's a special. How do I say? Yeah, it's a skill of mine. So sorry, Sawyer. You broke. What's going on, buddy? What have you been up to, Sawyer?
But you want me to go now? What's happening? You just pulled the Uno reverse card? I was waiting for you to talk. Man, that is so confusing. All right, whatever. I'll go. So I just moved over to Tirana, Albania, as of exactly a week ago, actually. And it's a really cool city. I am very impressed. Didn't know what to expect coming in. And it's a really, really green. It's a little toasty right now, but actually not too bad. It's like low 80s right now. So, and there's shade everywhere because there's just giant trees wherever you go. So I'm really happy. There's lots of things to do. Pretty limited vegan options, but they exist. So it's kind of like a scavenger hunt, you could say. It prevents us from eating out all the time. Although so far, our favorite place that we found was a place that had vegan and non-vegan options, but they had half vegan options, and it was a gelato place. And you can order the gelato on a croissant. It was mind-bendingly good. I think about it every time I get even anywhere near it, but it's just a cool city, and very, very happy to be here. And we're here for another couple months or so. So that's my update, I guess, the one I'll go with.
Sawyer, 1 week of us not working together, and you're already eating croissants and
my
gelato.
God.
And what's going on, man? You've fallen off completely.
Don't look at me.
No, I'm
Don't look
kidding.
at me.
I'm kidding. No, that sounds awesome, man. I think it sounds like it's definitely a step up from where you were in terms of the options you have available to you and the accessibility to nature and just access to things that are important to you. So I'm glad to hear that you've been enjoying the city a little bit more. Is there anything that's kind of on the list of things that you guys want to do that you haven't been able to tick off quite yet?
Yeah, I want to do some actual hikes. We haven't done any since Spain. And so, and even even while we were in Spain, it wasn't there aren't any real natural areas there. So I'm going to try to hunt some down here and see if we can't find an actual, state park or something to go hike around for a day. I think that's next on my list here.
Cool. Giacomo, what's new with you?
Well, obviously it's getting hotter out here. You can tell by the fans that are going on over there. It's finally getting nice, and I've been a little annoyed with myself because I should be out enjoying the sunshine and doing things, but I have been so focused on what we got going on over here because I've been rallying up the Vegan Strong Plant Built team, and I must have made 60 calls last week on top of what I usually do because we're thinking about ways that we could bring the team closer together and get more cool stuff going on. So brainstorming with all the athletes last week and focusing on what we could potentially to do together next year. And that work spilled over into the weekend, but Daisy and Desmond came over, and that was kind of fun just hanging out with them for a little bit. I got a Mud Girl run, which I'm not participating in next weekend. I shouldn't, definitely shouldn't. But Desmond is going to be able to because he's a little boy. He's 6 years old. I think he's participating. I'm not quite sure. it all kind of just got strung together. So we're going to go there next weekend. The following weekend, I'm going to do my first Spartan race with my client Shireen and her partner John. And I'm the kind of person that can be peer pressured into most things. Yeah. I'm the kid that like your parents were like, please don't do that. Don't give into peer pressure. You're going to get yourself into stupid situations. But this is a healthy situation, right? It's not going to derail me from my bodybuilding or anything like that. Like CrossFit has been destroying this household. It's what I told our whole team. I'm like, y'all are to blame for this. Danny has gotten hook, line, and sinker stuck in this thing. And now if I ever want to see my wife again, I'm going to be a CrossFitter. So, and it's just getting worse. Like last week, I was counting the fingers. I'm like, 3 days of training with bodybuilding, 2 days of CrossFit. I'm still a bodybuilder. But in all honesty, when I was doing my belt squats, my legs were so much more mobile and I was so much stronger than I used to be. See, what happened with me was I went from bodybuilding to powerlifting back to bodybuilding, and something about like the way my muscles moved, they feel stiffer than they used to. Whereas back in the day when I was just focused on hypertrophy and I was coming off of endurance-based sports, I could crank out reps like it was nobody's business. But nowadays they just feel like slower and achier and more tired. Like I'm focused on my body composition and I've came off of powerlifting and I got work stress and life stress and this and that. And it's like, okay, so shut up about it and do some CrossFit, come home, and guess what? A month later, having some cross training going on has actually helped with my specificity, believe it or not, which is quite cool. But I feel like this is kind of a nice segue into what we're doing. Well, no, wait a minute. Did we get to talk about you, Ben? What's going on in your world?
We didn't.
I can keep
but,
going.
Good call.
No, but I don't matter. We can just go on to the podcast.
No, we gotta hear it.
No, that wasn't even sarcasm. I hate talking about myself, but I'll give a little update, I suppose. What's new with me? Well, like Giacomo said, the weather has been warmer, so it's been nice out. We were able to go kayaking recently, which I don't think I talked about the podcast, and that was fun. Just been going for more walks and runs, going to the beach every now and then, and just being outside, which is very nice because the New England winters are long, and I feel like we don't even, we kind of get a spring, but it feels like it's just a very long winter that goes right into summer. It's like, it's cold, 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 and then suddenly the temperature jumps up 20 or 30 degrees and it's summer. So it's here somewhat abruptly, it feels like, but I'm glad for it. It's been in the 80s and it'll probably be in the 80s this whole week, except for the fact that there's this weird trend that I definitely remember last year. I don't know if you do, Giacomo, and it's continued this year where it's like really nice during the week, but then on the weekends it ends up being like rainy and kind of crappy weather. And I think everyone in New England loves bonding over weather and how much they hate it. So that's a fun topic. But other than that, nothing too much. I went out to Denver for a concert. That was fun. Got to travel a little bit, go to Boulder. So it was my second time out there, my first time being earlier in the year for a ski trip. So there was that. And other than that, just been like seeing friends and family more, which has been nice. Going out to eat more frequently than is typical, but I feel like I've been able to make pretty good choices with that, which sometimes, depending on my goals or the phase that I'm in, I'm a little bit looser or stricter. And generally my MO is still like, I'll kind of get what I want, but just, don't eat to the point where I'm uncomfortably full. But like yesterday we went out for ice cream and like I ate, I'd say I ate like probably like a third or a half of my ice cream. And like normally I would just finish the whole thing because it tastes good. But I was like, honestly, I'm fine. Like I'm satisfied. I don't need to eat the whole thing. Cause that's something I struggle with even at home is like, if we have food that I've bought, I'll feel like I have to eat it. I don't want to throw it away. Just because I don't like wasting food. I don't like the idea of that. But in this case, I was like, you know what, I'm fine. Nobody's being harmed by not eating this ice cream. So I ended up just tossing it. And then we came home and it was a weird day. We ended up actually having dinner after that. And so that was like a small little win I felt like for myself was like, okay, I didn't feel like the need, I guess, to eat the whole thing. So that's just a small thing that stood out. But other than that, yeah, I've just been enjoying the warmer weather mainly. We've got the World Cup going on now in the States starting this week. And there's a stadium near Giacomo and I that is hosting some World Cup games. So we've had a lot of people kind of coming into town and who will be coming into town for those games, tens of thousands of people. So that'll be interesting to see. But that's pretty much it.
Cool.
Right on. I did not know that. Thank you for letting me know. Now I'll blame the World Cup for all the traffic. Should I go into Boston?
There you go. Exactly. But Giacomo, I think what you were getting at towards the end of what you were saying is this myth. I had written this down, that this myth of cardio will kill your gains. That's kind of one that I feel like a lot of people who are into building muscle, maybe have heard. And I think, like anything with a lot of these myths, there's like kernels of truth to them, but I think they've been taken too far. Oftentimes, at least I can say this for myself. So, if you're coming from an endurance background and you're getting into strength training and you're running like, 100 plus miles a week, you're doing like crazy amounts of physical activity, there is some truth to this, this what would be called interference effects with cardio and strength training. But I think the level of physical activity you have to get to is like, you have to be probably a competitive athlete in that other sport that you're playing, and really like the time and attention and energy is probably more than what you're putting into strength training for that really to show up. And I would say, like you were saying, Giacomo, sometimes I think that actually cardio ends up getting neglected. Like I remember when I first started getting into lifting weights, I would like intentionally try to not do anything after training legs, like for the next day or so, like just be like immobile basically, because I thought it would be better for my lower body gains. And again, I think there's you probably don't want to go out and run 15 miles after your leg day, but if you are walking around and just doing your normal activities, you could you could even probably go for like a quick easy run, in the day, that day of or day after, and it's probably not going to really impact you. In fact, I found like the day after training lower body, or those days after, getting up, going for some walks, getting some movement, and I feel like I get less sore than if I just kind of was sat around all day. So that's one thing. And then also like the aerobic benefits that you get, like not getting winded during your higher rep sets, or just your strength training in general. I know, Sawyer, when we were working together, that was something that you kind of noted, was like the ability to work on your work capacity. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I think I'm one of these people that just doesn't like cardio, so it was an easy, kind of thing for me to avoid. But then, the more intensely you do leg training, the clearer it is when you're coming up short in that department. But yeah, so my leg training, I think, made it clear that my cardio is not great. And so actually having some dedicated cardio sessions was a really good idea. And I think what really helped me actually do it was just lowering the intensity and the frequency down to an amount that I felt like was like, okay, I could do this kind of thing. And then I could turn it up slowly as I started to like identify as somebody who could do that or just not hate it all the time. Because I think when, I tried to do cardio in the past, it was always like, I should be able to do like this much intensity and for this long. And when I couldn't do that because I was just jumping into the deep end right away, it was kind of frustrating. So a little aside there, but basically working with you and having you be like, you should really do some cardio, and then having like a set schedule for it, and knowing I was going to have to like check in about that was an overall really good thing. And I could tell that it improved my, not only just my quality of life, but like my leg training specifically got better as well.
Giacomo, do you have any experiences with this?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to start off by suggesting that you don't try to put 50 pounds on your bench in 50 days, like the beginner myth that we had going on. And if you
Mm,
continue to repeat a program like that to gain 150 pounds on your bench in 150 days, you might wind up with a torn AC joint. So don't do that.
mm,
Fortunately, we're a lot smarter these days than we used to be, but there's still plenty of pervasive stuff and myths that are out there and things that we are easily influenced by, especially with social media culture. And I think of our earlier roots when we were coaching and how I saw the bodybuilding culture shame cardio or fear prescribing cardio. And then I saw people be easily influenced by that. And to a degree, it affected us as well, but we wisened up as fast as was possible. And over time, you do realize that it's not just about being a well-rounded athlete. It's about there's a limit to the amount of specificity that you can put into play for your sport. And there is an end game there. It makes, like, even for a powerlifter, for example, like there's evidence backing the fact that like your 1 to 3 rep ranges will be more powerful if you have enough, not just the minimum, but if you have a little more than the minimum when it comes to getting cardio in. Because even powerlifters forget it. I mean, back then, powerlifters were like, no cardio at all. And bodybuilders were like very sparingly in certain types of cardio. These days, you have to stick with what works, what's tried and true. There's a certain amount of cardio that it makes sense to get in a prescriptive manner at certain zones for your cardiovascular health, right? Because one day you won't be competing and you want a healthy ticker after the fact. But two, being more cardiovascularly fit helps you with hypertrophy, helps you with your strength, helps you with your power. So I think it just makes sense to not just ignore it, to actually be prescriptive with cardio, even if you are lazy about it, not in the mood to do it, or you're trying to bucket out your time more responsibly and being like, well, what are priorities? Bodybuilding's my priority. Not gonna do my cardio. Like, that's a mistake. You want, to my point earlier in this conversation, my lifts went up and I did them faster after being more cardiovascularly fit from doing CrossFit for just a month. And I was shocked. I didn't believe it. 14 years in a row of lifting for the past 30 years on and off. I did not believe that would happen. And I was shocked a couple days ago when that happened. I was like, well, this is confirmation here. It makes sense. The cardio is actually helping.
Something that you touched on earlier in that conversation. Sorry, did you have something to say there to follow up on?
But yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it's interesting because, you know, we all want to be specialists, or at least we tell ourselves that, because it's like we care mostly about one or two different aspects of, you know, bodybuilding or whatever. And but that can lead us to ignore certain bottlenecks. So I think it's really interesting that you had that experience of like, wow, cardio was actually holding me back with bodybuilding training because you had advanced in all these other ways, but the cardio was probably just kind of holding you back in some ways. And so and then you started to work on it, and then everything got better because it was like the Achilles heel, maybe. That's pretty interesting. So yeah, thanks for sharing that experience.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, Sawyer, of like cardio being the limiting factor, like the rate limiter. I think that's something, and this will segue into another myth. I think the way that people think about nutrition when it comes to gaining muscle, I think the best way to think about it is that nutrition is permissive to building muscle or muscle growth. Like, you know, if you're doing all the correct things in the gym, nutrition can hold you back. But up to a certain point, having, you know, quote unquote, perfect nutrition isn't going to be better than, you know, 80 or 90%, assuming those big principles in place. So that really most of the time comes down to, are you eating calories that are appropriate for your goal? Meaning, you know, are you in a deficit? Are you in a, you know, are you in a surplus, maintenance, whatever it is? Are you getting your protein in? You know, are you getting your fruits and vegetables in? Do you have kind of minimums for carbs and fats that make sense? Once you're ticking all those boxes, you don't need to hyper fixate or hyper focus on nutrition to the extent that I think people often do. One of these myths that I have written down here that you'll often hear, I think a lot of bodybuilders have said this, is like it's 80% diet and it's 20% training. And I think that when it comes to fat loss, perhaps this maybe holds more weight to it. Because nutrition is going to drive more of a deficit than physical activity. If you just think about it logically, like the amount of calories that it takes to, or I mean, the amount of the expenditure that it takes to burn a certain number of calories that you eat, it's kind of crazy. It's like, you know, you eat an Oreo and then it takes a lot of physical activity to burn off that one Oreo. So it just makes more sense to create that deficit through your diet most of the time. But I think once you have those big rocks in place, again, like I think more attention should be put on your training, on maybe your cardio, like Giacomo was saying, your physical activity, leaning more into these things that are going to move the needle. So if you've been focusing so much on your diet, and this is something that I specifically fell into, I remember, like I spent the first probably couple years of fitness being like really focused, and you know, it was fun for me at the time, like learning recipes, learning things that I enjoyed, and kind of creating a diet that was sustainable. But I think I was neglecting learning about some of the principles in the gym, mainly because I think I felt overwhelmed with how, you know, complex it was. And I think that's a reason that having a coach can be helpful, because they can kind of distill down for you, you know, what is a reasonable program. And maybe we can get into kind of some programming myths here. But really, like having a program that is set up for your goals and set up for your experience level, and progressing that is going to make a huge difference. And as long as your nutrition is good enough, again, it doesn't have to be like perfect, because you know, what is perfect in the context of nutrition doesn't exist. You're going to be able to see a lot of progress. So do you want to touch on maybe some of these like common training myths that people fall into, Sawyer, or you had a thought there?
Yeah, I was gonna follow up on that because I think, yeah, it is very important. Like you were saying, there's a lot of kernels of truth. Like when it comes specifically to fat loss, like nutrition is a big portion of that. You can totally ruin your deficit that you created throughout the week by having a crazy weekend. You can do all kinds of stuff like that. But I think people often underestimate how much building muscle really does affect how they look. And so if they think I want to look really fit, and then they think automatically, oh, that means getting really lean without spending time building some muscle first, that's another situation where it can be a little bit problematic. So that, they might just look like a smaller version of themselves instead of like as toned as they want to be, as muscular as they want to look. Even the people that don't want to look all that muscular probably have a significant amount of muscle to try to build before getting there. So I think it's important to talk to somebody with maybe some more experience in like crafting physiques, even if you're not like trying to look exactly like that person. Because I get that like people like us tend to just take everything to the more extreme, and people aren't necessarily like, that's what I want to look like. But at the same time, like we understand to get to a certain level, it is going to lend itself to like understanding the anatomy and the biology of what's happening there. And so if you're confused about like what look you're trying to create and how to do it, just basically know that it's going to take probably more training than you think, and then maybe some fat loss as well. And for the most part, training is going to need to be a part of that. Like a certain amount of knowledge and like application of training is going to take a big portion of that. But to transition into the next point, you were saying like some of these training myths. And I think one that I wrote down, or maybe I think I wrote it down, but it just popped into my head. So I want to bring it up and see if you guys have heard this one before. I had heard from my dad, I think growing up, where I don't know if he really believed it or if he was just like reciting what he had heard, but he had heard like high reps for toning and like low reps for mass or something like that. And he had the same thing that he had heard for barbells versus dumbbells or something like that. Like barbells build mass and dumbbells like sculpt the muscle or something like that. So I think, in tandem with that last myth, I think it's important to talk about like the actual anatomy, like what is the physiology of like muscle building, fat loss? Is there a way to sculpt muscles? I think that would be a cool road to go down. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just so people have a basic, understanding here. I think some of maybe I don't even know where these myths got started. I feel like it was kind of some of the OG bodybuilders who would say things like this. But I think a lot of it was like when they were preparing for a contest, you don't have as much energy, so you probably just don't feel like lifting as heavy, and so you're just gonna lift a little bit lighter and like go and get a
Yeah.
pump, especially if you're taking we'll just say like exogenous substances, you probably don't need to maybe put as much
Train
of
as hard.
well, to a certain extent. I think maybe what was the grain of truth here was as they were getting ready for a contest, you don't have as much energy, you don't feel like as lifting heavy, so they just happened to lift lighter, and they were also eating less, so then they lost body fat, and like they're attributing the fact that they like got leaner and they're sculpting their physique to the higher reps, whereas really that was just like a byproduct of the diet and maybe just having less energy, not wanting to lift as heavy. But really it's like your muscles are kind of, I don't know, dumb to a certain extent. Like they don't know, you don't need to confuse them into growth, you don't need to constantly be switching things up. Like as long as you're training them close to muscular fatigue slash failure within a couple reps, within 2 or 3 reps or less, you're going to be producing enough stress on that muscle to cause it to, need to adapt to that and therefore grow and hypertrophy. So there's no necessarily evidence, like, the literature would indicate that sets anywhere between probably 4 reps all the way up to like 30 plus in some instances are going to build pretty similar amounts of muscle as long as they're
Hmm.
to a sufficient intensity. Now practically, I think like a good rule of thumb is probably more like that 8 to 15 rep range. I find a lot of my programming ends up sitting in, just because it's not
Hmm.
so heavy that, there's a lot of bracing and skill demands, and it's not so light that people are taking forever, or, they're
Hmm.
stopping because their muscles are burning, which is another myth, I think, is that you have to like feel the burn in your
Hmm.
muscles, in order, or like just that the burn enough is going to be enough to produce muscle growth. But you
Hmm.
really need to, have those hard reps where your reps are slowing down. That's kind of how you're close to failure, is your reps are slowing down without you trying to intentionally slow them down. It's just like,
Hmm.
hey, I'm doing a bicep curl and the first couple reps are like this, and as I'm struggling against it, it's getting harder and it's getting slower. Like that's how you know that you're,
Hmm.
fatiguing them sufficiently. Giacomo, do you have any kind of thoughts here? Do you want to jump in?
I think one of the easiest things and probably arguably the most low hanging fruit here is the idea that you need to use more resistance to gain muscle. And if you're not increasing the load that you're using, then you're not, well, we call it engaging progressive overload, but you may not even be familiar with that term if you're newer to lifting. If you're not lifting more weight consistently and doing more reps, you're not getting stronger. And there are so many other variables that come into play when you are moving that load. There is getting better at moving a load, producing more force under the load, being able to control the load better, being able to become more aware of what an accurate range of motion is, so that you're not wasting, gaining momentum before and after the range of motion. You're training the muscle to exhaustion within the range of motion. There is choosing the right movement patterns. There is choosing the right movement patterns for your body. There are so many different variables that come into play as that will help you get stronger. And honestly, when you get stuck in that I need to add more weight kind of mentality, then you risk eventually engaging in what we refer to as mechanical breakdown, where physics no longer apply and you're just moving the load. It doesn't matter how, to dumb it down, shitty your form is, you're just going to need to lift more weight or you're failing. On the flip side of the coin, you also have lifters that are hyper obsessed, whether it's the bros that are like super sciencey, or maybe a newer lifter that is afraid they're going to hurt themselves, or they want to make sure that they perfect the movement before they get stronger. And so you can overcorrect too. So there's the like, I want to be really safe and I'm afraid to push because I need to learn what I'm doing, or like, I need to understand mechanically how this works and tinker things around because I'm being very scientific about it. And then there's the alternative where it's like, I'm a workhorse, I'm going to grunt, I'm going to work harder. And if I'm not lifting more, then I'm failing. And then PS, well, you're going to fail. And on the other side, if you play it so safe, or you're just so fixated on movement, you're not going to push hard enough. So the answer, like most things, is usually somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to add to that, I think, yeah, it's a lot of what I do as a coach is try to at least get people to send some form videos so that I can see which category they are likely to be falling into on more of their sets, and so that you can kind of keep them away from the edges, which will both be unproductive. And just to provide the listener with a little bit more background too, is that I think one of the things and you guys did a great job of explaining, like, okay, this is like kind of the parameters you want to keep, and to even explain like physiologically what's happening, because I think a lot of confusion happens when like, for instance, I've heard like Pilates instructors or like people, OG bodybuilder type people say you can like change the shape of a muscle based on how you train it. So they'll say like, oh, Pilates, we get long and lean muscles. And, bodybuilders will say, yeah, I get, higher reps for more definition, more cuts in the muscle, more density, whatever. And that just fundamentally, like Ben, how you were starting to say, like muscles are dumb. It doesn't really, not only do they need just like a certain kind of stimulus, it doesn't need to be like exactly a certain type or like in a certain rep or something like that. But also they are just either growing, maintaining, or getting smaller. There's no like shaping that can really be done, because just anatomically you're born with kind of the muscle fibers you have. And yes, you can in some cases like whatever. Well, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But the point is that you can't really change the shape of your muscles other than growing them or shrinking them. And so to try to do that by emulating somebody's training routine, you're going to end up kind of being pretty disappointed. What it really comes down to is what is the ratio and what is the amount of muscle tissue that you have compared to the amount of fat mass that you have, and how do you like that balance, right? Because you might find that you're training a certain way and you like how you look, but it's really important that you understand what is my body composition right now? What is the amalgamation of muscle tissue to fat mass that I have? And do I want to keep this? Do I want to change that ratio? Because I think people attribute it to the training, but it's simple. It's just the resistance is going to build muscle, especially when you do enough of it and intensely enough. And if you are controlling for calories and kind of have a knowledge of self in like terms of like, this is my maintenance. If I eat more than this, I'm going to gain fat mass. If I eat less than this, I'm going to lose fat mass. When you have an understanding of those things, you have a much better handle on what you can make your body look like. And it doesn't really have much to do with the type of training outside of what you guys just said, which is like, are you doing effective resistance training to build muscle? Other than that, you're not changing the shape of it based on like the movements you're doing or the rep ranges you're in and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like the knowledge that everybody is going to have, I mean, we all have the same muscles, but they're going to look different based on if our bone structure, the way we're put together.
Hmm.
And there's really no way, like you said, to change the shape other than to grow them or to shrink them. There's some small research about you can maybe like buy a certain kind, like you can grow a muscle more towards the origin or the insertion. We call that distal or proximal, but that's getting a little bit too into the weeds, I think. And like you said, Sawyer, the thing to focus on is really, what proportion of, muscle mass to body fat percentage am I kind of going for here? And along those lines, I think I wouldn't say this is a myth because I think there's some validity to this, but the idea that you have to, if you are carrying some body fat and eventually you'd like to be in a leaner spot, that you have to start with a diet, you have to cut first and then go into a build. I think that oftentimes just focusing on the habits and the kind of the what's the word that I'm looking for? Maybe the areas of opportunity that are low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit. Looking for those areas starting there is going to already see you progressing without necessarily changing the weight that you're at right now. So just being at maintenance and focusing on, okay, let me increase my protein intake if it's been maybe lower than what would be recommended. Let me focus on improving my sleep. Let me focus on being really consistent with my training and progressing my training. Doing all of these things is going to give you a body recomposition effect to the point where you might not even necessarily need to go into an intentional deficit to start. I think oftentimes the benefits of doing that is one, it creates buy-in because people are seeing results and they're seeing that their body is changing. So if somebody needs a little bit of that buy-in, then okay, I think that lends more validity to the cut first and then build from there. But I think the issue, and we see this a lot, I think, especially with maybe smaller, females or women who come to us and they've been trying to eat low amounts of calories for long amounts of time. They're chronically underfueled and over dieted. Like telling them that they need to continue like cutting or dieting to get to a point where they're satisfied with the amount of leanness that they have and then go into a build. I think that's kind of backwards. I think oftentimes a spot, that makes sense actually is to try to get them to slowly increase their calories over time, work on a lot of these habits that aren't related to their scale weight, and more so again some of those other variables that are going to have a positive impact on their body composition. And then when they're in a good spot to diet, their calories have been built up higher, their stress has been managed better, they have more systems and routines that are going to allow for a successful fat loss phase. Because sometimes throwing somebody right into the deep end with a fat loss phase and asking them to do all these things, start tracking their macros, etc., that can be really difficult for them to actually adhere to that and to be successful with that. And then if they're having trouble with adherence, they're hurting their confidence, they feel like they can't do this. So I think for the right person, it can work. But I think oftentimes just getting them to, hey, let's just focus on changing a couple things at first before we go into this inherently stressful state of being in a deficit, on our bodies. I think that that's something where I know for myself, when I started, I wish I had kind of just like done a maintenance diet and focused on, a lot of these habits as opposed to immediately trying to go into a deficit. But I'd love to know kind of your guys' experience with this.
Well, I didn't do anything as far as dieting or becoming aware of how much I was eating and all that because when I started lifting when I was a teenager, it was just a matter of becoming active and it was to make the tennis team. So I don't have any experience with that in the beginning but as far as thinking about different clients, I think it's next to near impossible to have a client buy in if you don't start them leaning out because that's what they you got to you got to dangle a carrot. You got to give a dog a bone. Sorry, it's not very vegan of me. Please don't shame me. But believe that you need to give a little something to get a whole lot. So you give somebody what they want, and that's the reward. And then eventually down the line, their habits and routine are reinforced and they get what they need. But to Ben's point, it can be a little tricky because some of those habits and routine that need to be in routine while you're while you're in calorie reduction mode, it's hard to get that person out of calorie reduction mode after the fact, and it's hard to get them to shelf those tools and be like, oh well, yeah, you become this hamster at a hamster wheel, and you can't stop. It's like, okay, well now I got to track to do this, or now I have to pay attention to my calories to do this, or whatever. It's really hard to get people to let go of that stuff, and then they see it as like a reward based system because they're rewarded for their efforts when they're dieting down. I wish that
Yeah.
it were different, but it's kind of hard to get a client to acquiesce and buy into the process of body composition and focusing on selling habits and making them routine and being consistent is not exactly sexy. It doesn't get people hyped up, unfortunately. I would love to hear if you have either of you had a client who has wanted that you've been able to steer away from that and have them work on something else for the first 12 weeks and then have them down the line get leaner? Can you think of a scenario like that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've worked with people that have more or less fear around going to maintenance even, but the way I frame it to them is like, hey, this is where you're going to live most of your life, like once you've reached a certain point that you want to get to. And if I don't properly teach you how to do this and if you don't feel safe at maintenance, then you're going to stay in a deficit indefinitely, and that is just not going to be a healthy thing. So it's something that I sometimes do need to like keep repeating, but eventually I think it does sink in for most people that especially once they start experiencing more and more diet fatigue, and I keep pointing to it and saying, hey, that's why I keep saying we need to go to maintenance calories. But not everybody's as afraid of it as some people are. I think people with a history of having more body fat than they would like to for a lot of their lives are a little bit more afraid of higher calories sometimes. But again, that's why we just have to be encouraging and educational. And I think eventually most people are able to get there because they can see like, yeah, maybe I can't do this forever once they have some diet fatigue things creep in. But go ahead, Ben. I think you're going to say something.
I think, Giacomo, to answer your question, I have found that I've had some clients who have come to me probably wanting to pursue fat loss more aggressively than I would like to see, or that I think that they're going to be able to be successful with. And sometimes we go the route of, okay, let's explore that and see how it goes. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. And we kind of give them the spiel of, here's what you can expect. Do you still want to go ahead with this? I'll help you do it in the best way that we can. And other times, I think they've kind of acquiesced and said, you know what, I'm willing to trust your guidance and your expertise, and let's try it your way. And for those people, if I can get 3 to 6 months of buy-in with them of, hey, let's just be at maintenance and focus on really, especially for people who haven't really, I think, put the time, energy, and attention into really specific hypertrophy training, and maybe their nutrition has some areas that can be improved as well. Again, increasing their protein. Now, what does that actually mean? What is an evidence-based amount of protein? I'll sneak in another one of these myths here. And I think one of those is that you need to eat a gram per pound of body weight in protein. Hey, that's a heuristic. Heuristics can be useful. Now, if somebody is very overweight, that's not going to apply. And so oftentimes I think that what I've started saying to people is whatever your ideal body weight is, shoot for 3/4 of that. So, if your ideal body weight is 120 pounds, shoot for 90 grams of protein. I think that tends to work well for a lot of people because the evidence would pretty much suggest 0.7 to 1 grams per pound of body weight is going to be where you max out. And really, it's hard to say with certainty that one is necessarily even better than 0.7. Again, just based off the research that we have. So I think for people who are way under that, you don't have to get there immediately. But again, creeping that up over time towards that, let's say, optimal amount. And again, focusing on things like sleep, stress management, and, really focusing on their training, getting them to send me form feedback videos and seeing how they're executing things and giving them other areas to focus on besides just the scale and the mirror, especially if they're checking, if they're used to like really focusing on their physique a lot. I might give them some kind of other things to focus on so they're not so tuned into that, and say, hey, let's put away the progress photos. Let's put away the scale for 3 to 6 months, and then we take photos and they're like, oh my God, like I can see such a big difference. I'm the same weight here in these two different things, but I can see the difference now. I've got the buy-in. So for the folks who I think have a little bit more trust from the beginning in the process and are able to just say, you know what, I can be consistent with this, they'll notice things in the first, I would say, couple months before we've maybe taken those before and after photos where maybe their clothes are fitting a little bit better. So that's kind of some immediate feedback that I think can get them some buy-in. Like, my pants are fitting a little bit looser, whatever it is. So I think that there are other things that you can focus on that are going to be able to, again, create that buy-in. And I would say that usually it ends up being a case of keeping them at maintenance. And then when they're ready to, or maybe not even when they're ready, but like when it's in a spot where I feel, okay, it's appropriate to go into a fat loss phase, or actually, you know what, let's go into a build from here because we've had a little bit of a recompositioning effect. That's happened before. But I totally, I get what you're saying, Giacomo, and I think it's true that for most people, they need that kind of immediate, whether that's the scale or the visual changes in those 8 to 12 weeks. to get some buy-in. But I think, again, this is my kind of PSA to people that, hey, if you're able to have the patience to stick with those habits and be consistent without getting that immediate feedback or buy-in, in some cases, I'm not going to say in all cases, that's probably going to lead to a better result for you at the end of the day if you're not in a good spot to start out just jumping straight into a diet, which I think for some people, maybe they're not, depending on their, maybe their life is really stressful. They're changing jobs, they're changing homes, something like that. Might not be the time. Hey, maybe it is, maybe you can pull it off. But I think just putting that out there, that you don't always have to start with a deficit as your default if you're maybe not in the space to do so. Yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts on
I was
that?
just gonna tack onto that. Like, I love everything you just said, but also I think kind of one thing I was thinking about when you're saying that is like kind of how it connects to like nutrition is permissive of progress. Like doing good enough is gonna be pretty good at first, like especially if you've never done these things before, you're gonna see change pretty much even doing some things wrong with nutrition. But I really, really wish people would take training more seriously, or at least learning about training more seriously, because it's really hard for me to get form videos from people for whatever reason. And maybe I'm not doing a good enough job explaining the importance of like getting really good at training. Like training is a skill. And if you can get really good at training, you can do this much training and get that much benefit. You know what I mean? It's like it is a very palpable thing. And I think it's so like again, with the whole people don't understand how much muscle they're gonna need to build to look the way they want and feel the way they want and be as healthy as they want. I just wish people would like get a little bit more into that muscle side of things as opposed to focusing so much on the fat loss, because I know that that's the most immediate like, oh, look at this guy who did a cut, like that looks crazy. And but meanwhile they're not thinking about the 2 years of training he had done leading up to that, or she had done leading up to that, and then got cut. So yeah, I just think we need to like, it can't be overstated like how important good training is, and then all the things that come with it, right? Good recovery, good sleep, hydration, all that stuff. So hopefully people, when they hear this podcast, are like, yeah, I should probably look into training a little bit more. And like, it's not just about like not hurting yourself, I think is something that people should understand about form. It's also about really trying to bias certain tissues that you want to grow and not letting other ones take over, and like not know when that happens, because you might start noticing your training, especially as you start going heavier, might become less effective if you're not kind of aware of like what you're specifically trying to target, and if you're able to get to that intensity threshold we're talking about. Like the newbie gains will kind of run out if you don't. I mean, they're going to run out no matter what. Spoiler alert. But you'll stop making progress past a certain point if your knowledge doesn't also keep up with your body's adaptations, if that makes sense. So, all right, I'm
Or
gonna
if
leave it there.
Sawyer doesn't
yeah.
come to your gym and spot you and tell you to arch your shoulders some more, and then you wind up doing 4 more reps. So what I'm
Yeah,
saying is you
right.
need a coach Sawyer or a coach Ben in your corner, and you'd be surprised how much more you could do.
That's nice of you to say. But yeah, no, I wish people would take us up on that offer to like look at their
Hmm.
form more often, because even if they're doing something like that looks right, we'll often follow up and say, how did it feel? How are you feeling the day after? Like, are you able to get the kind of stimulus you need to grow? Is basically what we're trying to figure out. And so it's just, there's a lot more to it than just like copying the movements of the model that's doing the exercises. So just, even if you don't think there's any room for improvement in something, just film your sets and send them to people, because there's a lot of detail that goes into training.
Yeah, it's even just for you personally. If you have a hang up about sending it to someone else when you're working with them, for example, if it's like an insecurity thing or whatever, watch them yourself. You'd be surprised how much
Hmm.
more you could pick up on what you're doing. You don't have, I
True.
mean, whatever. Sometimes it's that. I know when I first
Hmm.
started sending I felt like an imposter because I was working with a coach who was also in the fitness sphere. I'm like, what if they judge me? What if someone finds out that my form is bad? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm a coach. I should know better and all this, all these kind of weird insecurities. I'm showing them to my other coach and whatever. And like, but then eventually nowadays I send the form checks that I send are the very last reps of my very last set. The hardest ones. Usually when you get a form check, in the beginning, I used to do them where I would be my warm up sets. I'd be like, I'm going to show everything right. I can't be whatever. But it's like, no, you want to see the absolute hardest reps of the last sets. And those are the ones that are going to make a difference. But I will tell you what, I watched him myself. It's just as much for my coach as it is for me. My coach is the one who's going to see things I can't because I'm subjective. It's me. It doesn't matter how
Mhm.
much you know, you're going to be
Mhm.
subjective if you're self coaching to a degree.
Mhm.
That's why you have someone else in it with you. The most
Mhm.
capable coaches in the world have coaches for that reason because they want someone not just in it with them, they want someone to be able to get them away from their own bias. We're humans, we have bias. But the other thing, again, film yourself and then watch it yourself. And you be, because how are you going to pay attention to yourself in the mirror while you're lifting? One, two, what's your form going to be like if you're looking in the mirror instead of lifting? So, and you're
Mhm.
focused on the movement. You're not focused on assessing your form. So film
Mhm.
yourself. It's one thing when you have someone in the gym with you and they can cue you and they can stop you and they can like move you and with your permission, touch and whatever. But like you still can't see what you're doing. Proprioceptively, yeah, it's cool. But there's still inherent value in filming yourself. Film yourself and watch
Mhm.
it. Even if you don't have a coach here, like it makes a huge difference. You'd be surprised what you could pick up on.
Mhm.
Absolutely, and I think that that speaks to why we ask people to film. You mentioned the intensity, so we can kind of check, are they meeting those thresholds of being close enough? And again, this is, you don't have to train to the point where you're doing the bench press and you get stuck because you can't get another one. Like that's a myth. You don't have to train to absolute failure. You just need to be close enough to that, and we can tell. That's, you can probably tell yourself just looking at your rep speed. Hey, is my first rep moving the same as my last rep? Okay, I probably wasn't close enough to failure there. And like Sawyer said, you don't like, when you think about training as a whole, you don't need to be in the gym 6 days a week. And you don't need to be there for 3 hours and doing, all the sets in the world. You just need to be doing enough in order to produce the adaptations that you want. And Giacomo was kind of talking about this balance earlier. Like, you don't need to be adding reps or weight every single time that you're in the gym for you to be able to grow muscle. Again, you just kind of need to get that sufficient intensity. And over time, the reps and the weight will kind of naturally come, because that same, 60 pounds for 10 that you did on bicep curls 3 months ago should be a lot easier now than it was then. And if it's not, then you're probably, you're either under recovered or over recovered. And you can kind of figure that out based on the context of, the rest of your program. But you don't need to be, getting anxious about like progressing every single week. People can, again, get this anxiety about not being able to progress, or feeling like, hey, if I didn't, beat my 60 for 10 this week, I failed. I haven't, grown muscle, even if it was a really hard set.
Mhm.
And then on the other side, you don't need to have perfect form. That's a myth as well. What There's no such thing as perfect form. There's form that is good enough and accomplishes the goals that we have set out. And there are nuances to, again, we talked about anatomy earlier. Like, everybody is built a little bit differently. Someone's squat is not going to be the same as somebody else's squat. So there's a lot of things that go into this. And then while we're on the topic of training, yeah, two more myths that I had that aren't necessarily related, but one is the fact that you need to be sore all the time in order for it to feel like, you've gotten a good workout. If you're doing
Mhm.
something new and novel, or you're doing a lot of training, you're probably going to be sore. But like, you can go and run for the first time in 3 months and you're going to get sore. Does that mean like it was the best thing that you could have done for muscle growth? No, not necessarily. However, if you're doing an exercise and then the next day you figure out that you're sore in the area that you were trying to target with that exercise, okay, that
Mhm.
could be actually a pretty decent indicator that you were targeting the muscles that you wanted to target. So again, as we've been saying, hints of truth. And then the other one that I have written down here is something that I definitely believed at the start, and that is that I think people in general might have this perception that machines are not as good as free weights, as dumbbells or barbells. But something like a Smith machine can be the right tool for the job, given the context and the right person.
Yeah.
And vice versa, a barbell might be a better tool for some people in certain contexts as well. It's, there's not one that's better than the other. And I think a lot of people who maybe started on barbells have a certain supremacist mindset around like, oh, these are the way, this is the way that everybody has to do it. But honestly, I think the barrier to entry for a lot of people is so much higher with free weights. They're intimidated. They're scared of hurting themselves. They're afraid they're not going to do it right. So for those people who are really new to the gym, get a Planet Fitness membership, go and try some of the selectorized machines, and like push yourself a little bit and see how that goes. Like, that is going to create a lot of confidence of like, I can get into the gym, I can weightlift. I don't need to know exactly what I'm doing, but I can work on it. Again, you can send form videos if you're working with a coach, and that can really build somebody's confidence, is just getting in there, using some machines, feeling like they're not going to have this weight crushing them or something like that, not have that fear. I think that's big for people.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I'll put some points on that. I think for the last one first, like I really do if a machine I really like a machine I'm going to that one every time. Like if it's well built and I really like the resistance curve and like all that stuff, I'll use that over anything else. And then I'm pretty much going to use like cables and dumbbells for like to plug any holes that machines don't fill. So I personally really like a good machine because it really takes a lot of the like stabilization out of it. For like I don't have to do as much thinking in terms of like I like to call it like a grip it and rip it exercise. If it's really set up to be like, wow, this machine just like feels great. I like the resistance curve. I get a really good stretch, whatever. I'm going to use that like 9 times out of 10. And then for anything else that I can't do with a machine that's like that I really like, I'll just, do dumbbells or I'll do cables. So and that includes Smith machine. I really like Smith machine. So yeah, I don't think people should shun machines in favor of free weights, not only because of the barrier of entry, but also just like the intensity you can bring to a set and not have to worry about, am I going to drop this on my face if I if I fail this rep or whatever. Like there's a lot of benefits of using machines. I did have a comment about your first, what was the other myth you said?
Soreness?
Soreness, that's right. Okay. So what I often talk about with clients is that soreness like definitely isn't necessary for muscle growth, but it can be a helpful indicator of recovery status. And so, like you were saying, like, yeah, when you first do something, you're probably going to be pretty sore. If you're not, that's interesting. I have seen some rare cases where people who are like endurance athletes don't get as sore or like really it's really hard to make them sore, and that's cool. But for most people, if they're pushing something hard, they're gonna get sore at least a day or two after, and that's a pretty good sign that they push something pretty hard, like with enough stimulus to grow. And so that's kind of like I would say like a medium term like indicator that like, okay, like obviously the session itself you could probably tell or should get good at telling if you pushed a muscle hard. Rep speed is a really good way to do that. Midterm, I think soreness can be really helpful for like, I did enough, but I'm not sore for like 2 weeks, because that would be too much. You'd be probably destroying something and it's just having to do extra recovery at that point. You can stimulate muscle with a lot less than, you'd have to do to get sore for 2 weeks straight. And also it's a good indicator of like, should I train this muscle again? Because if you're still sore 3 days later or 2 days later, and you're like in your program, it says, well, I'm doing this muscle again, and you're like cramping up or you're having to do half the weight that you would normally do, you probably should rest longer. Even if you can get acclimated to that amount, later down the line, it's just listen to your body. Don't try to override it by saying, well, this is what the program says, So listen to your body about soreness, because that is a really helpful indicator of recovery status. And yeah, and I think one other thing I like to tell people or ask people is, are there muscles that you find are never sore or like always sore? Because even without knowing any of that other stuff, if they say, well, yeah, like my calves are always sore, we can try to figure out why. Maybe their daily demand that they're asking of their calves is overwhelming them, and so they're getting tight and stuff, so they actually need to be trained more. Or maybe they're just training them way too much, or they're training them on top of doing a ton of steps or something like that, and they're just getting overwhelmed all the time and they're sore for that reason. So there's definitely, like, just like with most things, there's extreme ends that you probably want to avoid, and there's like a healthy middle ground in terms of recovery status. And soreness can be a helpful kind of way to make sure you're not in any extreme.
Favorite machine? What machine are we all jumping on together and when we work in with each other next time? Which one? What's it going to be?
I know mine. Can you
Ben's
guys
gonna
guess what
pick like
mine is?
hack squat because he's so
Yeah,
freaking strong.
yeah, exactly.
He's an animal at those. I've seen like the look in his eyes when he gets on a hack squat is actually terrifying. And he's just got bulletproof knees too. He's squatting deep and he's just pushing himself really hard. I'm like, wow, this is a different creature.
I used to have bulletproof knees, Sawyer. No more. I'm now a grandpa, so I can't say that I claim that anymore. But they've been better recently. So
that's crazy because you're still in your 20s, so I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, really. So it's the hack squat. We're going on the hack squat next.
Hack squat for me. What about you guys?
I'm jumping in with you. I'm going to hack squat.
Sir, hack squat?
No way, man. I'm doing if a machine. Oof, I don't know, man. That's tough.
Machine preacher, Carl?
Yeah, maybe. I was thinking arms because arms are my favorite. So it's got to be something arms. I do. But I don't have any tricep machines that I really like, even though triceps are my favorite to train.
I was gonna say maybe some kind of dip machine or something like that.
Actually, yeah, that's a great one. I actually do love the dip machine. I've been getting more into that lately, especially with my little seatbelt that I put on there. Man, just did it today, actually. Solid.
That's the first thing that I ever bought a seatbelt for, was this dip machine that I was using, where I was getting, basically pulled out, upright by the machine, and I couldn't stay downwards because
Yeah.
yeah, because of the weight. So,
Yeah.
well, this has been fun. I'm wondering if there's anything that we didn't hit, like myths that you guys feel like people kind of fall into when they first start out. I feel like we've touched maybe a little bit more on training versus nutrition. I mean, the list could go on and on, right? About things that people fall for. I think in general, like just like trying to be too perfect. I mentioned this at the start with their nutrition, like it has to be all whole foods and they can't have any processed foods. Like I think that's a pretty common one, or feeling like you have to hit your macros within 5 or 10 grams or calories or whatever it is, and being like extremely precise with most of this stuff. Is just be generally consistent over time, do a generally good job with like eating, a well-rounded diet. Like it's like kind of common sense stuff. But again, I think, you hear the louder voices in the space who will say things that are a little bit more extreme, has been a theme for this conversation. And you
Mhm.
get drawn to that. So any kind of closing thoughts that either of you guys have?
Other than the fact that I'm happy that we're speaking about training, because people usually look for support and come to us for nutrition, and we decide to nerd out hard on training. And I absolutely love that for our audience today. And I'm really glad that you all dug your heels in the sand and stuck mostly with the training myths. Although hopefully we don't disappoint you all, and you're tuning out. You're like, they're talking about training. I could do this already. I don't need anything. We're good. And I was like, no, like this is the stuff. So hopefully you're still listening and you've gotten some value out of this. That's really all I have to say.
Yeah. I'll follow it up with don't avoid carbs. Please don't avoid carbs. At least not completely. Sometimes there are problematic ones, sure. But yeah, I think if you want to have good training, and in training, it always comes back to training. If you want to have good training and you want to have energy to do the things you want to do, then don't avoid carbs. Maybe just move a little bit more. If you're considering like really, really limiting carbs, it's not a good move. So I'll just leave it at that, I guess, nutritionally.
And if you guys are saying, oh, you didn't touch on this thing related to nutrition or this myth, or like, hey, what's your thought on this? Drop it down in the comments below. If you want, request another episode and we'll touch on more nutrition myths last time. And if you leave them in the comments, we'll address them directly in the podcast. So that's a little incentive for you guys to leave some comments over on the YouTube video. Even if you're if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts right now, go to the YouTube channel, Muscles by Brussels YouTube channel, find the video and drop a comment. Takes 2 seconds, and we'll you'll get some actual you'll get people addressing your question directly. So thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the podcast. As always, if you are enjoying the show, it really helps to share with people however you can. Social media, word of mouth. If you're over on one of the podcast platforms, you can leave a review or you can rate the podcast. Again, those are very helpful. If you are interested in getting some coaching or getting some assistance, that's what we do here at Vegan Proteins. That's what the coaches do. We help people get in the best shape of their lives and help them with all these habits that we've been talking about today. So if you're interested, you can check out the link in the description or head over to veganproteins.com. You can find us all on social media, and we'll have all that information down below as well. Thanks again for listening to the episode, and we'll catch you all in the next one. Bye, everyone.